Turn this morning to the 21st chapter of the book of Job. While you're turning there, I'd like to at least point out, whether you noticed it or not, many of the hymns that we called out this morning had in a verse or in some reference to Jesus knowing the way, especially that last one we just sang. Now, we did start our song service with "Thy way, not mine, O Lord." That was intentional on my part. The ones that y'all called out were not my part. This is one of the reasons why I hesitate to call so many songs during the song service, because I want to see what's on your mind. And a lot of times it affirms what's on my mind based on some of the things that you guys say. What I say is intentional. What you say, I have nothing to do with. That's got to come from somewhere else. Right? See how that works? In Job 21, Job asks a question beginning in verse 7. It concludes with a statement that we'd like to look at in verse 14. Job 21 verse 7 says, "Wherefore do the wicked live, become old, yea, are mighty in power? Their seed is established in their sight with them, and their offspring before their eyes. Their houses are safe from fear, neither is the rod of God upon them. Their bull gendereth and faileth not. Their cow calveth and casteth not her calf. They send forth their little ones like a flock, and their children dance. They take the timbrel and harp and rejoice at the sound of the organ. They spend their days in wealth, and in a moment go down to the grave. Therefore they say unto God, Depart from us, for we desire not the knowledge of thy ways." What an interesting passage. This passage describes the seemingly endless safety and prosperity of the wicked in the world around us. Is not this a true and up-to-date perspective, even in our life? Notice here in Job that the wealthy and their seed were called the establishment long before modern politics ever came into being. It seems like nothing bothers the wicked in this world. And I'd like for you to also notice that there is a verse in here where it says the rod of God is not upon them. Did it not say that? Verse 9. Their houses are safe from fear, neither is the rod of God upon them. What does that sound like? Which verse reminds you of that in the New Testament? Perhaps Hebrews 12. The Lord chasteneth every son whom he receiveth. And if you be without chastisement, then are you bastards and not sons? For whom the Lord loveth, he receiveth, and he chastiseth. So if these individuals are without the chastisement of God, it is logical they're without the love of God. And if they are without the love of God, they're in a lot worse position than they could ever imagine. But did you notice, based on everything Job has laid out here, all these conditions that Job has laid out here, based on all the things that the wicked see around them, and all the things that the wicked experience around them, it's not an attitude of gratitude, but it's an attitude of, we don't need you. Depart from us. We desire not the knowledge of thy ways. The Christian world will oftentimes present those around us, the unsaved and lost, as a lost and dying world dying to know. Some of y'all have heard that. It's in popular Christian songs here, there, and yonder. And oftentimes ministers of the world, in an attempt to goad their congregations into diligent discipleship, will remind their congregations that untold millions are dying untold. And it's your fault they're going to hell. Friends, the doctrine of election itself is often seen as unfair because they say it would eventually at some point cut out somebody who would want to be in. He wants to be in, but he's not elected, so we can't get in. What did Job just say here? Job states the wicked have already said to God, depart from us. In other words, there's not a person going to be left out of the election of God. If the person wants to be in, he's already in to start with. The wicked are not lost and dying to know about God. The wicked are not desiring to be included in the family of God. The wicked are completely content with who they are, what they're doing, and where they're going, if they care about where they're going at all. They have said to God already, we desire not the knowledge of thy ways. Now, contrast that with Exodus 33. This is a rather lengthy passage of Scripture, but it does set some bit of a tone and a perspective for us. So let's begin reading. Exodus 33, verse 11. The Lord spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. And he turned again into the camp, but his servant Joshua, the son of Nun, a young man, departed not out of the tabernacle. Moses said unto the Lord, see, thou sayest unto me, bring up this people. And thou hast not let me know whom thou wilt send with me. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast also found grace in my sight. Now therefore I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight, and consider that this nation is thy people. And he said, My presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. And he said unto him, If thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence. For wherein shall it be known here that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? Is it not in that thou goest with us? So shall we be separated, I and thy people, from all the people that are upon the face of the earth. And the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing also that thou hast spoken. Thou hast found grace in my sight, and I know thee by name. What an outstanding passage. What was Moses' request? Show me thy way, that I may know thee. Now there's a whole lot more within this that we might touch on a little bit later this morning, but what does it mean to know the ways of God? Wicked said, we desire not the knowledge of thy ways. I don't think that that's y'all's desire this morning. Because frankly, I'm going to go ahead and say this at the beginning, because most people remember what you say at the beginning and what you say at the end, and the stuff in the middle is there. Moses said, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me thy way. The fact that an individual wants to know the way of God is an evidence he's found grace in the eyes of God. That request comes from a heart touched by grace. I'd like for you to also think about this. Knowing the works of God is not the same as knowing the ways of God. You can certainly know what God does by observing His works around you. But you cannot know God without knowing God's ways. Those are two completely different things. God's works answer what God does. God's ways answer why God does what He does. To observe works of an individual, that doesn't often tell you much about the person. It's understanding why a person does what they do. It's often most important. I mean, take, for example, the lunchroom here at the basement of the church. I've been here 25 years, and I've yet to figure out why the lights are wired the way they are in the basement. I have yet to even figure them out what they are. I have to flip every switch to figure out which bank I want to turn on and turn off. It makes no sense to me at all. If it made sense to the man who did it, I'd really like to talk to him and figure out why he did what he did. I kind of got a feeling it didn't make any sense to him either. Our catalog at work, the furniture. The labeling of the furniture makes no sense to me whatsoever. You'd think the small desk would have one number, and the bigger desk would be labeled as a bigger number, right? Like a small desk would be like a 101, and the very biggest desk you have would be like a 105. And they'd all progress like that. You'd think it'd be that way. It ain't. Our middle-sized desk is a 105. Our largest desk is a 101. Makes no sense to me. I see people's works all the time, but that doesn't tell me a thing about them other than the fact that I just don't understand them. People might look at me and say, I don't understand you. Very fine. The works of an individual do not convince you anything about that person much. For example, in Exodus chapter 5, Moses comes to Pharaoh in Exodus 5 and verse 1. And Moses and Aaron say to Pharaoh, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, let my people go. Verse 2. And Pharaoh said, Who is the Lord, that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? Now, he's not inquiring here by saying, oh, please explain this individual to me that I may understand your request and send it on. He's saying, who does this person think he is that I should let him go? He's being arrogant and proudful and condescending. He's putting himself above God. What happens then after this? A process of plagues come upon Egypt, do they not? Something happens in Exodus chapter 8. And it's the plague of lice, the third plague that comes upon Egypt. Moses stretches out his rod and turns the dust of the land into itty-bitty lice. Pharaoh's magicians attempt to do the same thing. And it says here in verse 18 of Exodus chapter 8 that the magicians did so with their enchantments to bring forth lice, but they could not. So there were lice upon man and upon beast. Which kind of is interesting to me is that Moses brings forth this plague, and the magicians tried to duplicate the plague, which would have just made the plague worse. You would have think they would have done something to make the plague go away. But the magicians say to Pharaoh in verse 19, this is the finger of God. And Pharaoh's heart was hardened. Pharaoh saw the work of God. Did it change him? Just made him mad, didn't it? You know, Pharaoh's not the only one that saw the work of God and it had a bit of a negative effect on him. Israel saw the work of God all the time, did they not? Turn to Psalms. Psalm 103. Psalm 103 and about verse 6 or 7. Psalm 103 verse 6. The Lord executeth righteousness and judgment for all that are oppressed. He made known his ways unto Moses, his acts unto the children of Israel. Now notice what that verse says right here. The Lord made his ways known to Moses, but he made his works known to the children of Israel. Did you catch it? Made his ways known unto Moses, but his acts or his works were made known unto Israel, which gives you the idea that Moses had an understanding of God that Israel did not. Moses had a relationship with God that Israel did not. You say, well, what's the big deal about this? You know, if I saw the works of God as Israel did, boy, I tell you what, it'd change my whole life. You think? Think about this. Psalm 106. Psalm 106, verse 7. Psalm 106, verse 7 says, Our fathers understood not thy wonders in Egypt. So here they are in Egypt. They see the plagues. They see the deliverance that is given to them not only during the plagues, but after being delivered from Egypt, right? There was deliverance in the plagues, right? There was darkness in Egypt. There was light in the land of Goshen. The cattle were killed in Egypt, but none of the cattle of Israel in Goshen. The firstborn of Egypt died. Nobody in Israel died. Correct? Our fathers understood not thy wonders in Egypt. They remembered not the multitude of thy mercies, but provoked him at the sea, even at the Red Sea. Nevertheless, he saved them for his name's sake. Well, so much for easy believism, right? So much for the idea that God's not going to do anything for you if you don't believe. So much for the idea that God's not going to save you unless you ask him to save him. It's not about you. He saved them for his name's sake, that he might make his mighty power to be known. He rebuked the Red Sea also, and it was dried up, so he led them through the depths as through the wilderness. He saved them from the hand of him that hated them, and redeemed them from the hand of the enemy. And the waters covered their enemies, there was not one of them left. Then believed they his words, they sang his praise, they soon forgat his works. And all through the wilderness, they murmured and they complained and they griped and they fussed. And they said to Moses, Why have you brought us out here to kill us in this wilderness, to kill us in this land? Because all they knew were the works of God, right? When Jesus fed the 5,000 and they came and they followed him, what was his response to them? You seek me not because of the miracles, but because you ate of the loaves and were full. And when he began teaching them that no man can come unto me except my Father which has sent me draw him, they all departed. They were okay a little bit with the works of God. They did not want to know about the ways of God. Paul, in his Hebrew letter, then addresses this section of the Israelite journeying. And he has this to say in Hebrews chapter 3. Read verse 8. Hebrews 3:8 says, Harden not your hearts, as in the provocation, in the day of temptation, in the wilderness. When your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. Wherefore I was grieved with that generation, and said, They do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. So they saw his works. They never knew his ways. And because they never knew his ways, what does he say the result of that was? They would not enter into my rest. I hope to kind of tie a lot of this together because I feel like I'm leaving some loose ends out here. But if you'll go back and you'll read these passages, there are a lot of things repeated in these passages. But wait a minute. Israel went into Canaan's land, didn't they? And Moses didn't. Moses missed Canaan's land, did he not? But in Exodus 33, the promise was that God said, I will show you my ways and I will give you rest. Israel didn't know my ways and they won't enter my rest. So Canaan's land really isn't the rest of God. Just let's continue on. The ways of God. In Deuteronomy 32 and verse 4, we've quoted this verse a number of times down through the years. That the Bible says in Deuteronomy 32 and verse 4, He is the rock. His work is perfect. For all His ways are judgment. A God of truth, without iniquity, just and right is He. God's ways are always right. It is the rightest way to do something. Now that may not be English appropriate sentence, but I think it's theologically correct. In Isaiah 55, this is also probably a very familiar verse to y'all. In Isaiah 55, verse 8 and 9, God says, my thoughts are not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. Let's pause right there and let's just think about this. There's something that bothers me about this. There's a lot of churches out there that do focus on relationships between husbands and wives as they apply to the Bible. And if you take what Paul says in Ephesians 5, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church, then the parallel there is husbands are supposed to be like Christ, and wives are emblematic of the church. It's what it seems to me, right? And I think that that's fairly appropriate. Here's the problem that I have with that. If husbands are to be like Christ, and we know that Christ is God come in the flesh, we've just read 2 verses here that tell us that God's ways are always judgment. And He is a rock. In other words, wives don't want to deal with a husband who's wishy-washy. We're not allowed to have problems. We're supposed to be a solid rock that doesn't move. And we are always supposed to have the answer, right? Boy, sure is quiet on that one, isn't it? But you stop and think about it. You stop and think about when you observe people around you. I understand women can be emotional. Don't act like you're not. But what's worse than an emotional woman? A sissified man. Right? There's a reason for that. And I've just showed it to you in the Bible. And God says, your ways are not my ways. And I will say that there's some disagreements that happen in our house because my ways are not my wife's ways. And my wife's ways are not my ways. We are a bit different in the way that we address things. Which is why the church as a whole, and I would now include men and women in this, the church as a whole oftentimes have a problem with God because His ways are not my ways. I would not do it the way He's doing it. So I need to understand why He's doing it. Not just duplicate what He's done. Because if I just duplicate what you've done, I haven't really learned why to do it this way. He says in Isaiah 55 and verse 8, he says, my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God's ways are vastly different from man's ways, are they not? Though God's ways are vastly different, though, they're not unreasonable. But there's that long list in Proverbs that talks about the ways of man. Proverbs 12, verse 15. The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but he that hearkeneth unto counsel is wise. Proverbs 14 and verse 12. There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Again, that's repeated. Proverbs 16 and verse 25. There is a way that seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Proverbs 21 and verse 2. Every way of a man is right in his own eyes, but the Lord pondereth the hearts. And that one's a bit scary, because we may watch somebody work around us, and we may look at what they do, and we may look at that and say, logically that doesn't make sense. You've all watched people work in the office, and you look at them and you say, logically that doesn't make sense. You know why? It doesn't make sense. Because human beings have a tendency to do something just to be different. There are ways of doing things different that, hey, I can see that's a better way of doing it. Other times you look at somebody and say, that's a different way of doing it, and the only thing that you're doing is job security for yourself. Because if you show somebody else how to do this, you can be replaced. God doesn't do things different just to do things different, is what we're getting to here. God does things different because it's the right thing to be done, whether I understand it or not. Knowing the ways of God, from Moses' standpoint, is a completely different relationship with God than just knowing the works of God. So let's look here back at Exodus 33. And let's notice a few things. Remember, the wicked said, we desire not the knowledge of thy ways. Moses said, I want to know thy way, that I know thee. Exodus 33 and verse 11. The Lord spake unto Moses face to face, as a man speaketh unto his friend. This relationship that Moses has with God is intimate. Face to face, friend to friend. It's not third-party information that he's gathering from other people. Would to God, I wish that all Americans, at least Christians, maybe just the Primitive Baptist, would understand all the information you're getting from other states about things is second, third, and fourth-hand information. Ain't none of us there. None of us know what's happening. Are you listening? And with the rise of AI, computer technology, you don't even know if what you're watching actually has occurred. So people cutting off fellowship with other people because we got a different perspective on some video we've seen have not even paused to think and ponder within themselves, I wasn't there, I really don't know. When it comes to the relationship between you and God, it's okay for you to listen to what I have to say and consider it. Paul said that. Paul told Timothy, he said, consider what I say unto thee. But he prefaced that, but the Lord give thee understanding. What I'm more concerned with is not that you believe what I have to say. What I'm more concerned with is that you are intimate with the Lord. He spoke to him face to face, as a man spoke to his friend. Verse 12, Moses said unto the Lord, all right, you've told me to bring these people up, but you haven't really told me much else. Yet thou hast said, I know thee by name, and thou hast found grace in my sight. This is also personal. I know you by name. I mean, anytime you call a business around here, what do they want to know? What's your account number? What's your password? What's this? What's that? They don't know your name. Bank doesn't even know your name. A lot of the furniture companies we call and order furniture from, they don't really know us. They want to know what's your account number. The God of glory that spoke all things into existence knows you by name. Now, it may not be the name your mom and daddy gave you. You may get to heaven and find out you got something completely different. Who cares? I'm known by God, the sovereign of the universe, knows you. Now, there's an interesting thing also about verse 13. I like the way that Moses wrote this, or at least the way that this is written out. In verse 13, Moses says, now therefore I pray thee, if I have found grace in thy sight, show me now thy way, that I may know thee, that I may find grace in thy sight. Listen, how can Moses find grace in the sight of God? if he's already found grace in the sight of God, hold on. Well, maybe I'm over-explaining. You have God seated upon his throne. And he in his grace has looked down upon Moses. Moses is not the first person, though, to also find grace in the sight of God. Remember, Noah found grace in the sight of God. God was going to flood the world, but he told Noah, build an ark, save your family. For Noah had found grace in the eyes of God. You have one perspective. Something is happening from above. God is doing something because Moses has found grace in God's sight. Moses is now also realizing, I can go forth and do something because I'm finding that I have found grace in thy sight. You see? I mean, it's like what Paul said in Hebrews. Hebrews 4, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Christ Jesus, who's entered into heaven. Let us therefore come boldly before the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. We've already obtained grace. And now we're going to find grace to help in time of need. In other words, I found some money. You know the only thing better than finding money? Finding some more money. Right? We've already found eternal grace. You know the thing better than finding eternal grace? It's just finding more grace. Realizing that knowing the ways of God is also enlightening to us. It encourages us. It gives us hope for the future. And God said in verse 14, He said, my presence shall go with thee, and I will give thee rest. I think a little bit of that was already demonstrated in Moses' life. When they stood at the Red Sea and they complained and they murmured and they fussed, what did Moses say to them there in Exodus 14? He said, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Stand still and see what's fixing to happen. What does that remind you of? Does that phrase, stand still, does that sound familiar? Psalm 46, verse 10. What does that one say? We sang the song this morning. Be still and know that I am God. Knowing that God cares. Knowing that God cares about you. Knowing the ways of God, the character of God, the attributes of God, the working of God, why He works. Ought that not to calm us in this life? Ought that not bring us great comfort? Knowing the ways of God is a comforting thing. Be still and know that I am God. I've got this. Whether you think I have it or not. I love what Moses writes in verse 15 when he says, if thy presence go not with me, carry us not up hence. I think that oftentimes. I know y'all, I never say it to y'all, but I often think that as I'm approaching this pulpit. I realize I've been called to this. And I've been doing this for quite a number of years. But every Sunday's different. We were at Flint River Church, at Flint River Association last year, and I was to speak first on Saturday morning. And the song service was over, and I paused a little bit before I went in, and Brother Ben said to me, "Hey, go on, man, it won't bite." Oh, it might. It might very well bite. Especially in a meeting like that, where it's just sort of a general meeting, you have a lot of people gathered together, a lot of churches there. That's not a time for a man to get up there and grind out an axe against another man. That's not a time for some off-the-wall preacher who doesn't ever get invited anywhere because he ain't got anything to say, to get up there and introduce some strange, foreign, off-the-wall doctrine and convince somebody that his crazy ideas are right. That's not the time for that. That's not my congregation. So it's not my job to straighten them out. You know what I mean by that. But if you're not going to go with me, God, regardless of where I am, don't send me. Because if I go by myself, this is going to be miserable for everybody. And it's going to be over in a hurry. What years it takes a man to create a ministry can be destroyed in a matter of seconds. I mean, how long does it take to build a house? How long did it take to build this building here? How many months? I could burn it down in 2.5 hours. Right? Moses said, if you're not going to go with us, don't send us. Because how else? Notice verse 16. For wherein shall it be known that I and thy people have found grace in thy sight? Is it not that thou goest with us? Hey, we want some encouragement in this. We don't really want to seek signs all the time. But every now and then, Lord, we'd like to know. We'd like it just to be plain and obvious that you're with us. And the only way that we can make it known is that your presence goes with us. So when I have a thought, like I said beginning of this sermon, like if I have a thought, something I'd like to talk on, one of the things that encourages me is that the hymns that we choose kind of fall in line with that. And then in verse 17, the Lord said unto Moses, I will do this thing that thou hast spoken, for thou hast found grace in my sight. Oh, isn't that encouraging? Moses has made a request of the God of glory, and he's going to get that request. The wicked have said, we desire not the knowledge of thy ways. Don't want to know who you are. Don't want to know why you do it. When people ask you questions, if there really is a God, why would all this evil be occurring around us? It's really a foolish question. They don't care. They think that they've got it sewed up in their mind that there really is no God, because you can't really give an answer that they would agree with anyways. Paul has this to say in the book of Romans, chapter 11. Romans 11 and verse 33. Oh, the depth of the riches, both of the wisdom and knowledge of God. How unsearchable are his judgments and his ways past finding out. When I was kind of contemplating this late last night, something that struck me as we're sitting here contemplating the ways of God. Jesus Christ came and he said in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life. When Christ came, he was God in the flesh. He's holiness personified. He's everything that God is. And as he stood in their presence, they did not understand him. As he stood in their presence, especially the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they did not seek to know more about him. They sought to destroy him. Have you ever noticed how easy it is in America to be everything except Christian? That you can placard your business with all sorts of flags and all sorts of sayings and all sorts of new fad ideas, but the moment you placard it with something Christian, many people have a problem. The disciples didn't even understand him, and they received him. When he said, I'm the manna that came down from heaven. You know, the Israelites, the Hebrew word for manna actually is the phrase, what is it? You know, those Israelites walked out of their tents that morning and said, manna, which means, what is this? That's what the word manna means. What is this? When Jesus calmed the waters, what did the disciples say? What manner of man is this? In other words, manna, this dude's different. Psalm 77 and verse 19. Psalm 77 and verse 19 says, Thy way is in the sea, and thy path in the great waters, and thy footsteps are not known. Psalm 77:19 has just told you God walks on the water. Who did that? Jesus says, I'm the way. What did Jesus do? Came to his disciples, walking on the water in the midst of their trouble and in the midst of their problem, in the fourth watch of the night, when it was all but done. But have you ever noticed anything? Have you ever noticed that as boats go through the sea, and boats go through the ocean, and children jump in the water, and children jump and swim and play, that they leave no trace? You know, when you jump in the water, it's not like you leave a hole. It just covers up. When you plow through the waters, there's no trace. You'll never be able to prove to the wicked world around you there's a God. In some cases, he doesn't leave a trace. He just works. And the only trace he has left is what he has left in your heart. Jesus said in Matthew 11:28, Come unto me, all you that labor and are heavy laden. And what? I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me. Not about me, but learn of me. Learn from me. It's two oxen being yoked together, And you have the mature lead oxen taking his step one by one. And you have the oxen learning from him, taking the same steps. You're learning why the older, mature ox does what he does. And he says, I will give you rest. And yet here's the same thing, here's the same perspective right here. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest. Here we go. I'll give you rest and you find rest. Right? You found grace in God's sight. Now come find some more grace in God's sight. See how that, why? It's just all over the place. The wicked do not desire the knowledge of God's ways. They desire knowledge that to them makes sense. It's not necessarily the knowledge of God. We have a privilege as God's people that every day we can have quiet, intimate contact with the God of glory and not just be marveled at his works, but commune with him as a person, face to face, friend to friend, and get a little better understanding of the ways of God. Let's stand and sing a closing hymn at this time.